So here's what I'm going to be talking about. First is what do we mean by content marketing? It tends to have various different definitions depending on who you ask. Why am I talking about it being cheap and scalable? Why is that even something that I'm interested in? And then I'm going to talk about how we can get good ideas and importantly get those ideas signed off. And then I'll go through at the end some tactics and tools and hopefully give you some things to take away that you can start working on tomorrow. So what actually is content marketing? Well, that answer varies hugely depending on who you ask. Different people have varying different definitions of it. It can be a little bit problematic because it tends to get thrown about as a term and there's no kind of unified definition. So what I'll do is, for me, content marketing isn't necessarily exclusively what you're doing, it's more about what you're trying to achieve. And I imagine there's lots of different people in the room today with different kind of marketing objectives. So if, for example, you are a marketing director or a CMO, you might be thinking about direct traffic, revenue, and conversion. If you're on a content team, then you might be focusing on those on-site metrics. How long are people spending reading the content? If you're on a social team, then your content marketing is creating content to get reach, engagement, likes, and so forth. If you're on an SEO team, which is my background, when I, when I talk about content, I'm thinking more about creating content to get links, ultimately. PR team, again, content is more about kind of coverage and those kind of things, and UX, it's on site. But ultimately, we're all kind of creating the same thing. So when I talk about content marketing and what I'll be talking about today, I'm basically talking about just all that like internet stuff. The kind of cool, funny, useful, interesting stuff we see on the internet all the time that different brands create to hit one or all of those objectives. So if that's what content marketing is, why am I talking about it being cheap and why am I talking about it being scalable? I've been doing this for a long time and I think that content marketing has got a bit of a problem. And that problem is that just before this talk, when I was preparing for it, I went away and I asked people to share with me their favorite examples of content marketing, their favorite content marketing campaigns. Now, I got these back and pretty much exclusively they were video content, big HTML scrolling, parallax sites. They all take a lot of time and effort to create. Now, these are the kind of things that either you are already creating or you have an aspiration to create. And this is the kind of content that really will drive those results. However, who has ever tried to create a piece of content and it's just flopped? It just hasn't worked? A raise of hands. Please, more than that, don't leave me here. Okay, thank you. So, it's quite common, you know, we kind of go ahead and we get very excited and we invest time, energy, effort, resource in creating some content and then for some reason nobody gives a shit. It's just the nature of the industry we work in. I have an example of this that I draw upon quite a lot because it's quite a lovely and relevant example. We had a client and they were, what we were doing for them was a mix of digital PR, SEO. So again, creating cool shit on the internet to get some links. And they were an interior design company and we decided to run a campaign around home. This was just post-Brexit. At the time, I was living in London because I was a fool. And it was at the time when there was all of that London is open. All about the inclusivity, and London didn't want Brexit and was staying very open and it was very warm and fuzzy. So what I did is like the asshole boss I am, I made my team walk around central London with an armchair. Like I just followed them, watched them from behind. They're like walking around central London with this armchair and they put it down in front of various different landmarks and we interviewed people and we created some really lovely content. I think it might be my favorite campaign that we've ever done in terms of execution. It was some really, really nice, funny, heartwarming video content, and the tone was perfect for the time. We launched it, I think on the Monday morning. We got an exclusive in the Metro. The Londonist was very interested, all within a couple of hours of outreach. So we were killing it. We were super happy. That evening, the tragic terror attacks happened in London. So we immediately stopped the whole campaign. We stopped the whole campaign for several reasons. It would have been insensitive to carry on, but more so, our objective at that point was lost. We couldn't have a London-centric campaign. The tone had changed. The media was talking about something very different. So suddenly we had a client that, whilst our client understood that we had to stop the campaign, our client has still paid for something and got absolutely zero return. We've all been here. I know I certainly have. So how do we mitigate this? How do we mitigate this from happening and kind of solving this content marketing problem? Well, I believe the way that we do that is we stop putting all of our eggs in one content basket. What people, myself included in the past, tend to do is have a campaign, one big shiny campaign that happens, and we get very excited about doing it. Expectations start to rise as we focus on this single thing, so then the risk of it not working becomes super, super high. So what I believe we need to start doing is, whilst we can still create and aspire to be creating that content, we also need to be creating much smaller content that is cheap and that scales. So we can be doing multiple things at once, so we don't have that risk of a huge campaign not working. So how do we do that? Well, I have been doing this for a while, for about 10 years, and I have over this time developed a little formula. And this formula, I think, is threefold. These are the three key things that you need in order to create content that hits some of those objectives that we identified before. First, there needs to be an idea, obviously. The idea has to be not necessarily unique, but it has to be a unique play on previous ideas. It has to be a good concept that is fundamentally interesting, of course. Behind it, there has to be robust data. There has to be reliable, trustworthy data and information. And then the final thing is there has to be an asset, the thing that people are sharing, the thing that people want to create, the beautiful thing on the internet that inspires people. I have some examples of these. This is one of my favorite examples of this because it's just gorgeous. It's by an agency called Distilled. And what they did is they had a photo printing client. And they were like, okay, photo printing is relatively dull. So what they did was create this website that as you scroll, it shows how far, if you printed off all the Instagrams that were shared in a year, how far it would reach. And it's just a really neat idea. It has lots of data and information behind it, and it just looks beautiful. And you can see it in the results. What is it? So that it got like over 500 links to it. That's amazing. Thousands and thousands of shares. A really lovely piece of content. Another example I really like is by Evans Helshaw. They did a whole piece around James Bond cars. A nice idea, it was very timely, very well executed, with lots of data and information behind it. Again, links in the hundreds, shares in the thousands. These are the kind of things we want to be doing, but if we go back and think, okay, so if that's the formula and that's what we need, how can we do that again without creating risk around a single campaign, and how can we diversify what it is that we're doing? So if we think again about the formula, then we think about ideas. Now, a good idea is incredibly hard to come by, but it is, or outside of your time, essentially free. Data. This is easy. We live in a world of data. Getting information is very easy and also very cheap. Assets. The creation of the content. Now, this is typically where it can get expensive, and this is where it can get really, really hard, from my experience. So then the question becomes, well, can we kind of get these results that we're looking for without the creation of an asset? Is that possible? Fortunately, for the rest of the talk, yes. Who remembers this campaign that Greggs did very recently, where they did the Valentine's dinner? Yes, it was awesome. So basically, Greggs put on a Valentine's dinner. This didn't have an asset, really. They created a video, but that wasn't really necessary. This was just the idea. The idea of Greggs putting on a Valentine's in it was so, so novel. It got wall-to-wall coverage. This slide just says so much about my personality. My intention was to have a slide with all of the logos from all the different publications, and I got like 1% of the way through, and I thought, there's more to life than screenshotting logos. I hope, anyway. But yes, you get to the idea. Wall-to-wall coverage. Every single blog, media house, publication was talking about this, because it's Greggs. What they did was take their brand and spin it on its head, and it was delightful. Now, we're not all Greggs. We can't all do this, but the lesson is that there wasn't a particular thing. And what, as an SEO, I find even more mind-boggling about this is Greggs was creating all of this amazing coverage and getting so many links. But they're not a transactional site. They didn't even point it to anywhere on the Greggs site. All of these links and all of this power went to OpenTable, which is just incredible and amazing for OpenTable. I hope that Greggs can look back on that and go, next time we'll just create a page. Just create a page, Greggs, no biggie. Another example is, who remembers this guy? Yes, so polarizing. I, as an individual, don't really like self-censorship, but even I couldn't bring myself to stand in front of a picture of an elf teabagging a Barbie. I just couldn't do it, so I cropped it. Because it's the morning, it's going to be indecent. But it was absolutely polarizing, this campaign. Again, hit all of those objectives that we can only dream of as marketers. They didn't cost them anything. All they did was get a little doll and a background and a camera. That's it. They're not investing huge amounts of time, effort, and resource. I also love this example. If there's anybody here that works in the music and the leisure industry, this is just simply a list. There was, about 2 years ago, a talent agency that published how much it costs for musicians to be hired, and then a company basically just dumped it in a Word document and shared it. Now, this is really, really fugly, but again, like, it's crazy. I have to send like 200 links, 150,000 shares. So people are interested in sharing content that isn't necessarily hugely visual and very beautiful, which is good for us. So, we've established that we can do these things, so how do we go away and do it? Regardless of whether we're a big brand or we've got big budgets, how can we do this? So I spoke briefly about ideas. Ideas are perhaps the most important aspect of this. A good idea is everything. What tends to stop good ideas from happening is sign-off. So how can we get those, if we have an amazing idea, how can we actually get people to say yes to it? I think for every, I think 90% of my good ideas go in a somebody said no bin. So how can we try and prevent that first and foremost? Well, before we've got to think not necessarily about why people would say yes to an idea, but why people say no. What kind of objections? Now, I run an agency, so I'll be talking about this from the perspective of a client, but it can be your boss, your manager, the rest of your team, just people you need to convince to do a thing on the internet. So here's some common objections I tend to find. Firstly is, sorry, that's never been done before. That happens quite a lot. What also happens a lot is, sorry, that's been done before. That happens all the time. It's very frustrating and very difficult. Another thing that I tend to get a lot is, sorry, that's off-brand, which is fair. Or also, sorry, you can't do that. That sits with a PR team. Happening more and more and more. And what I came to realize over the past few years when I was thinking about this is that for the most part, we pay people not to fuck up. That's how we're incentivizing our teams. We incentivize people not to make mistakes, not to have some crisis, not to say anything offensive. Poundland seemingly don't care about that. For the most part, we're trying to encourage people to just not make a mistake. That makes people very risk averse, keeps people in their boxes. Very few brands genuinely incentivize on innovation. There may be some of you here that do that or aspire to do that, and more of us should be doing that. Myself included. I think everybody should stop worrying so much about what perceptions are going to be and just own your narrative and care a little bit less within the realms of decency about what people think. Now, this is a problem. This is a real problem because what we're doing as marketers when we're trying to create really cool things that are going to get those results that we want to get, we need to be able to say interesting, unique, and new things. So here's some ways that we can try and convince people to do that in a world where everybody's trained to be very risk adverse. Can mitigate risk through data. Again, as people who work in digital, we are armed with a wealth of data that people before us have never had. So make sure any idea that you have has quantifiable data behind it. I'll go through a campaign process shortly to talk about how to do that, but data is key. Also, a mistake that I always used to make, that I'm trying to make a bit less, is I would go and I would pitch an idea and I would ask for a yes or a no. I've stopped doing that, and now I simply ask for consideration. I ask people to consider my idea first and foremost. People are much more likely to consider it than when you're asking someone for a yes or a no. That opens the gates. So if you're going to pitch, if you're going to a scenario where you're going to talk to somebody about your ideas, start out the meeting by saying, look, all I'm asking here for is just for you to consider some of these ideas. Just consider them. It creates a different narrative. Another thing is, have you ever heard of there's something called the Columbus complex, which I read about and I find fascinating, and that is, as individuals, we all want to be the person who discovered something. So, what I historically always did was, and this is a few years ago now, what I would do is I would go and I would say, okay, here is my idea, this is what my idea is, okay, goodbye, thank you. I'll give you an example, actually. We were working with an airline, and I wanted to create a piece of content about the awkwardness of flying sometimes. So if you're kind of sitting in the middle seat and the person next to you falls asleep and you need to get out and go for a wee, like, what's the etiquette there? Do you wake them up? Do you just kind of awkwardly scoot past them? Like, I think we should commonly have some kind of guide that helps us all navigate those potentially difficult and awkward situations. I pitched this to the client, and the client said no, because they were scared about people interpreting it as the negatives of flying. And an airline doesn't want to do that, I get it. So I dropped it, but I'm not very good at dropping things generally. So about 2 months later, after I'd read about the Columbus complex, I went in and I pitched this particular idea again. But this time what I did is I pitched it through a series of questions. So I said to the client, have you ever traveled alone? She said yes. I said, were you in economy? She said yes. I said, did you get the middle seat? She said yes. I said, was it long haul flight? She said yes. I said, did anybody fall asleep next to you? Yes. And then we started laughing. She was like, it was so awkward, I really didn't know what to do. And I said, don't you wish there was some kind of guide? And she said yes. And suddenly, our idea was signed off. Now what that is, all that is simply she realized what our thought process was. She kind of went through that journey herself to figure out how we got to that idea. So if you do nothing else after my talk and there's an idea that you always wanted to do, but it always got a flat no, go back and work out a series of questions to get to your idea, and then try pitching it again, not through sitting and telling somebody what the idea is, but asking them questions that helps to try and guide them through the process. Then they feel like they've come to the idea and we're all happy.